So when we apply this to our own experience of being, because if you really look at what spirituality is, at least to me, and I don't mean just to me personally, but I've been doing this for 22 years now, and so I've talked to hundreds of thousands of people. And we all have our own way of articulating what our spiritual endeavor is about for us. Why we're doing it, what we hope to get out of it. Well, I hope you know those things. One of the first things I was surprised by when I started teaching was how many people that came to me when I asked them really specifically, why are you here? You know, I started to do that at retreats one day, and people would just, they'd ask for a question. I'd just say, well, I'd like to ask you a question before you get to your question. Is that okay? And they'd generally say yes, because they're trying to be very, respectful. And so I'd say, so why are you here? That if you want to get somebody to look like a deer caught in the headlights, why are you here? What is all this about for you specifically, exactly? Right? And what I found out was something that really surprised me, that the majority of people I asked that question to didn't really know specifically. They'd often try to throw something out like they've heard before, like, oh, I want enlightenment. What does that mean? What's enlightenment to you? Hell, spiritual teachers can't even agree on what enlightenment is. What is it to you? Right? Because enlightenment to anybody is only relevant to you in terms of what you hope it to be. An experience of being that you hope will be derived by this thing called enlightenment. Right? So, to have a certain clarity about why am I doing what I'm doing, specifically. Not that it can't evolve, it probably will evolve over time as your experience evolves. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And if we look at that, of course, we'll always eventually find I boil it down to, I think what people are generally looking for is an extraordinarily deep and profound and meaningful experience of being. An extraordinarily deep, profound, meaningful, perhaps even inspired experience of being. Something like that. We have a lot of different ways to articulate that for each person. But something like that. And so we'll go about looking for whatever that is for us. Whether some people look predominantly intellectually. They're approaching it through the mind, right? And other people are looking for the right understanding. They are lovers of insight. And I don't mean just 2 + 2 = 4, but real insight. They love the experience of insight, and so they're looking for the sort of deepest possible insight. Other people are sort of hooked up, more emotional and feeling-centered. They're looking for the deepest experience of being. If insight helps them get there, fine. But if it doesn't, who cares? I'm gunning for some wonderful experience. It could be as small as I just want to suffer a little bit less. It could be as immense as I'm looking for some version of liberation. But no matter how we look, what form our seeking takes place in, well, we're always looking for something, waiting for something, anticipating something. Even though you're told not to do that, you're trying not to anticipate because maybe it will help get you what you want. Does that make sense? I'll let go of anticipating because maybe it'll help me get what I'm anticipating. So if you can sell me that letting go of my anticipation is going to help me, then I'll do it. Otherwise, I have no interest in letting go of it, Or I'll let go, but boy, am I expecting something really extraordinary in exchange, right? Now I know we don't think ourselves really clearly in this way. I'm trying to articulate something that's kind of a little more murky, and that we. But what if a way of responding to this call or this yearning that can show up in so many unique ways, but is essentially, it's also, I think, a transcendent call. That we're all then looking for something, waiting for something, anticipating for something, hoping for something. There's one thing missing in that equation, is being completely immersed in the direct and immediate investigation of the immediate experience of being. Because if we were to look into the immediate experience of being, not necessarily for the sake of changing that experience, but because we actually love, I guess you could say, is probably the best word. What's the combination of sort of love and obsession? Something kind of like that. You love or you're obsessed with. Getting to the bottom, the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter about yourself, about life. The big existential questions, which is what spirituality is really there for in its deepest sense. It's there to as a way, as a means of confronting the big existential questions of life. Who am I? What is life? What is God? What is death? Is there any way to go about this that seems just a little bit less crazy than the way we're doing it? Which has become a pretty existential question, nowadays. It gets more existentially valid every day, Maybe we could just go for just a little bit less insanity, That would be nice. But what I'm trying to really show is the usefulness, the necessity at some point where looking within doesn't mean that we're looking within or we turn our gaze within and we're just doing the same thing we do when we look out, which is looking for something. You can look in and just look for things. And boy, there's as much of a internal landscape as there is an external landscape. There's infinite variety of things to find and explore. And if that's what you want to do, that's perfectly fine. But that's a kind of misunderstanding of what look within means. Look within, you begin by looking at what's happening inside of you and what you feel and what you think, and then you notice that, wow, there's also this immense ground of quiet, which is sort of like the background context, which seems to be the background in which all of my experience and thoughts and feelings, it arises and plays itself out and ultimately disappears, but there's this immensity of quiet. Now, if we're highly attuned to that quiet, you can experience it quite vividly even when you're using the mind to think or you're feeling something or whatever. It's if you're attuned to it, it's always the background of your experience of being. But at the beginning, we often need these moments where the whole sort of internal dialogue quiets, and then you start to notice, oh wow, there's a lot of quiet inside. It's a whole other thing to notice, oh, even when the dialogue starts, there's still a whole lot of quiet inside. That it's the kind of the ground or the context in which all of experience unfolds. Okay, now you're starting to look within in a little more intimate way, right? Because until that time, you're just looking only at the experience that's unfolding, right? Which there's a time to do that. But then you start to notice there's more than just my moment-to-moment of unfolding experience. There seems to be this profound ground of whatever it is, it's certainly quiet. It doesn't seem to be talking even when my mind is talking to itself. So now we're getting a little closer to a truly and radically subjective experience of being. In our modern culture, we think of subjectivity in some sort of negative sense, like that's just your subjective opinion, that kind of thing. But in spirituality, really what you're endeavoring to do is to have a 100% absolute subjective experience of being. There is no experience of being other than one that's subjective. Even if it feels like the subject has fallen out of it, it's still an immediate perception. In that sense, the goal, in one sense, is to become 100% subjective. So there's no psychological distance between you and yourself, or you and your lack of self, whatever the case may be. Those of you who've taken it this far, you know it starts to, all by itself, when you start to have a deeper experience of being, it brings naturally certain questions up, like, well then, what am I then? I can have a vivid recall the day that question hit me, and it sort of hit me like a freight train, because I was like a freight train going at 100 miles an hour towards what I thought enlightenment was. And all of a sudden, I realized I didn't even know who I was that was chasing the enlightenment. I didn't know who was living each moment of my own life. I didn't know who was having the hopes and dreams and everything else that I had. And that hit me, especially when I was, young, in my very early 20s, it hit me as a kind of a shock, like, good Lord, that the basis of my whole life, I seem to be completely ignorant about. I thought I understood it until I actually looked at what I thought I understood. And when I really started to look into the self that I thought I understood, the whole thing started to kind of unravel. Which naturally brings up the deeper existential question of one's own being.